All right. Hello, everybody. This is Antonio Wolf. This will be another series of reading and commenting. That's basically going to be the full reading of the entire book, just like I did with the trial. I think I might. Well, I should give some background on this book. It is almost guaranteed you've never heard of this book. This book is very odd. Uh, it is mainly known because other famous writers uh, made this clearly an influence on them, at least stated. The man who wrote this, David Lindsay, was not a famous writer in his own day. Uh, he wrote, I think, 3 or 4 other novels. None of them were successful. This wasn't successful when it first came out, but this is the one long-lasting hit that he had. There's not much you'll find on the internet about him. He wasn't much of a notable person, but there was an essay that I found months ago about him as a person. And interestingly, this book came as a result of his failed philosophical dreams. He was very much steeped in the classical philosophical tradition up to the days of, German idealism. And that's actually what he wanted to be and contribute to as his life goal. But things didn't work out in his life very well for that. So, he didn't get a degree in philosophy. I think he spent most of his life working in some office or bank, something like that. And he did this stuff just like me on his free time. But he had a lot to think and a lot to say. And he had a wife that was wiser than he was, and he had thought that maybe he would work things slowly on his own and write some great philosophical tract to add to the already mountainous literature on philosophy. And his wife was wiser than he was and said, "Well, how about you take all those creative ideas in philosophy and try to do something else. You're not going to be able to stand out if you try to just join this already overcrowded field. So write a book instead. Write a storybook." So he did. And this is the book that came out of that. And I have to say, thank God that his wife was wiser than he was, because this book is far more memorable and far more fantastic than anything he could have philosophically written. Most people who are even aware of this book and try to read it cannot understand it. They find it very confusing. They say it's very trippy. A lot of people just analogize it to an acid trip, which it isn't. I mean, it's just straight up. I don't understand how people find this confusing in that manner. It's not illogical in the same way that trips are. It's not dreamlike even. It's actually very consistent, pretty clear for the most part. And you can see that there's a huge set of philosophical influences ongoing. And by this, I don't mean that you need philosophical background. A philosophical background certainly makes it a richer experience, but you don't need it. Pretty much everything discussed in the book is self-contained, quite frankly. This is strangely called sci-fi, even though it's not. The only sci-fi thing about it is in chapter 2, I think, they get on a glass or crystal rocket ship and quote-unquote go to another world, but that's literally just a mechanism, just to get the story started to where it needs to go. Beyond that, there is no technology. It's not in the future. It's closer to fantasy, but not fantasy in the way that we mean it today.
Yeah, this predates Tolkien.
Yeah. This is closer to what is it in German called a Bildungsroman?
Yeah, Bildungsroman.
Yeah, and it's a general story about the development of the soul. And that's really the major gist of it. It's along the same lines of something like Lilith by George MacDonald. What is it? I've never read it, but what is it? Pilgrim's Progress or something.
Yeah.
Same kind of thing. It's a development of the soul, and also it has particularly like strong Gnostic bent. So if you know a little bit about Gnosticism, you could definitely see a lot of it. Although I will say that this is not a story that really gives you a message that is the classical Gnostic message, or at least the picture of Gnosticism that most people who superficially know about it have. And there comes a certain point about halfway through the story in which this becomes clearer, and once we get there, you will definitely notice it. But anyways, yeah, that's all there is to say about David Lindsay and the origin of this book. It's very creative. I love it. I've listened to this book probably around 14 times over since I first listened to it. Just like the trial, I've listened to it, the trial a lot. And I decided, well, it's worth reading and commenting on its entirety because one, most people aren't aware that this exists. Two, there's quite a lot to say about it, just like in the trial, in a different way than with the trial. And as we're reading this, I will definitely have fresh insights and fresh thoughts that I've probably not had before, which is also what happened when we were reading the trial. It's one thing to listen to things and have like sporadic insights to what you manage to like hear while you're driving and not paying 100% attention, and then there's a difference between that and actually focused reading where you have the time to like sit down and as you're reading also reflect on things. As you can see this is the cover. It's my favorite cover. I love it. Other covers are nice, but this is my favorite one. There's actually a recent edition that was illustrated, but I don't quite like the style of the artist who they chose to illustrate it. Otherwise, I would get it because it looks pretty nice, at least quality-wise. But yeah, we'll just get on with it. This book is what is it? It's public domain. Yeah, it's public domain now. So the version on Gutenberg. What is it called? Yeah, Gutenberg.org is good enough. So, Chapter 1, The Seance. And since this is a very philosophically aimed book, a lot of the names will be weird. Can't say that he was very creative with that, but at the same time, the fact that they're just like so in your face about what they're symbolizing is also a refreshing thing. Okay. On a March evening at 8 o'clock, Backhouse, the medium, a fast-rising star in the psychic world, was ushered into the story at Prolands, the Hampstead residence of Montague Fall. The room was illuminated only by the light of a blazing fire. The host, eyeing him with indolent curiosity, got up, and the usual conventional greetings were exchanged. Having indicated an easy chair before the fire to his guest, the South American merchant sank back again into his own. The electric light was switched on. Fall's prominent, clear-cut features, metallic-looking skin, and general air of bored impassiveness did not seem greatly to impress the medium, who was accustomed to regard men from a special angle. Backhouse, on the contrary, was a novelty to the merchant. As he tranquilly studied him through half-closed lids and the smoke of a cigar, he wondered how this little, thick-set person with a pointed beard contrived to remain so fresh and sane in appearance, in view of the morbid nature of his occupation. So, a medium named Backhouse. I don't know. I think that's pretty straightforward. If you know anything about the occult, or it's it's in the background. There's also many mysteries in that. It's where the magic of the world is contained, and a lot of horrifying things and scary things within it too. But also a lot of fantastical things. The fall name. Sometimes they're spelled weird, but also the weird spelling and the way it sounds is on purpose. So, fall has something to do with fallen. I'm not going to go too much into the meaning of the structure of this place, although it is structured to be very meaningful. So, do you smoke? Draw the fall by the way of starting the conversation. No. Then will you take a drink? Not at present, I thank you. A pause. Everything is satisfactory? The materialization will take place? I see no reason to doubt it. That's good, for I would not like my guests to be disappointed. I have your check written out in my pocket. Afterward will do quite well. 9 o'clock was the time specified, I believe. I fancy so. The conversation continued to flag. Fall sprawled in his chair and remained apathetic. Would you care to hear what arrangements I have made? I am unaware that any are necessary beyond chairs for your guests. I mean the decoration of the séance room, the music, and so forth. Backhouse stared at his host. But this is not a theatrical performance. That's correct. Perhaps I ought to explain. There will be ladies present, and ladies, are aesthetically inclined. In that case, I have no objection. I only hope they will enjoy the performance to the end. He spoke rather dryly. Well, that's all right then, said Fall. Flicking his cigar into the fire, he got up and helped himself to whiskey. Will you come and see the room? Thank you, no. I prefer to have nothing to do with it till the time arrives. Then let's go to see my sister, Mrs. Jameson, who is in the drawing room. She sometimes does me the kindness to act as my hostess, as I am unmarried. I will be delighted, said Backhouse coldly. They found the lady alone, sitting by the open pianoforte in a pensive attitude. She had been playing Scriabin and was overcome. The medium took in her small, tight, patrician features and porcelain-like hands and wondered how Fall came by such a sister. She received him bravely, with just a shade of quiet emotion. She was used to such receptions at the hands of the sex, and knew well how to respond to them. What amazes me, she half whispered, after 10 minutes of graceful, hollow conversation, is, if you must know it, not so much the manifestation itself, though that will surely be wonderful, as your assurance that it will take place. Tell me the grounds of your confidence. I dream with open eyes, he answered, looking around at the door, and others see my dreams. That is all. But that's beautiful, responded Miss Jameson. She smiled rather absently, for the first guest had just entered. So that's interesting. I dream with open eyes and others see my dreams. If you know anything about mysticism in general, the dream analogy is actually pretty common. And I mean, it's not meant in the way that, that we normally think of dreams. That people think like, oh yeah, I dream things. And for some reason, in the current age, we've come to a very weird belief that dreams are subjective creations of our own. But if you pay attention to the actual dreams we have, when we manage to remember them, dreams are the weirdest things. And they're not things that we are subjectively creating in any active way. And oftentimes, plenty of it is clearly related to the things that we are feeling, the problems in our minds, and all these other things. But in a lot of other times, they aren't. They're just weird. But weird in a very strange way in which the weirdness makes sense. So, there's the whole thing in the idea of dream logic that despite the fact that, according to regular physical laws, things don't make sense, nonetheless, there is a way in which things make sense within dreams. And it is a very aesthetic thing. It's the same way that, stories make sense, the same way that poems make sense. You can shift things around and link things around in ways that are linguistic and meaningful, but not physically understandable.
From my perspective, I would like to point out that Scriabin is interesting here because his music, if you know it, is very dream-like as well. So it sets the tone very well.
No, I did not know that was an instrument.
Now, Scriabin is a composer, but she was playing the pianoforte.
Oh,
she was
okay.
playing his works.
Oh, yeah, that's one thing to mention. David Lindsay loved music theory. There's actually a whole chapter on music theory in this book. So, there will be an importance of music. So let's see. She smiled rather absently, for the first guest had just entered. It was Kent Smith, the ex-magistrate, celebrated for his shrewd judicial humor, which, however, he had the good sense not to attempt to carry into private life. Although well on the wrong side of 70, his eyes were still disconcertingly bright. With the selective skill of an old man, he immediately settled himself in the most comfortable of many comfortable chairs. So we are to see wonders tonight? Fresh material for your autobiography, remarked Fall. Ah, you should not have mentioned my unfortunate book. An old public servant is merely amusing himself in his retirement, Mr. Backhouse. You have no cause for alarm. I have studied in the school of discretion. Oh, I am not alarmed. There can be no possible objection to your publishing whatever you please. You are most kind, said the old man, with a cunning smile. Trent is not coming tonight, remarked Mrs. Jameson, throwing a curious glance at her brother. I never thought he would. It's not in his line. Mrs. Trent, you must understand, she went on, addressing the ex-magistrate, has placed us all under a debt of gratitude. She has decorated the old lounge hall upstairs most beautifully and has secured the services of the sweetest little orchestra. But this is Roman magnificence. Backhouse thinks the spirit should be treated with more deference, laughed Fall. Surely, Mr. Backhouse, a poetic environment. Let's see. This is Backhouse talking. Yeah. Pardon me. I am a simple man, and always prefer to reduce things to elemental simplicity. I raise no opposition, but I express my opinion. Nature is one thing, and art is another. Let's see, and I am not sure that I don't agree with you, said the ex-magistrate. An occasion like this ought to be simple, to guard against the possibility of deception. If you will forgive my bluntness, Mr. Backhouse. We shall sit in full light, replied Backhouse. At every opportunity will be and every opportunity will be given to all to inspect the room. I shall also ask you to submit me to a personal examination. Sorry, put that in the wrong voice. Oh well, it was Backhouse. A rather embarrassed silence followed. It was broken by the arrival of two more guests who entered together. These were Pryor, the prosperous city coffee importer, and Lang, the stock jobber, well known in his own circle as an amateur prestidigitator. Backhouse was slightly acquainted with the latter. Pryor, perfuming the room with a faint odor of wine and tobacco smoke, tried to introduce an atmosphere of joviality into the proceedings. Finding that no one seconded his efforts, however, he shortly subsided and fell to examining the watercolors on the walls. Lang, tall, thin, and growing bald, said little, but stared at Backhouse a good deal. Coffee, liqueurs, and cigarettes were now brought in. Everyone partook except Lang and the medium. At the same moment, Professor Hallbart was announced. He was the eminent psychologist, the author and lecturer on crime, insanity, genius, and so forth, considered in their mental aspects. His presence at such a gathering somewhat mystified the other guests, but all felt as if the object of their meeting had immediately acquired additional solemnity. He was small, meager-looking, and mild in manner, but was probably the most stubborn brain of all the mixed company. Completely ignoring the medium, he at once sat down beside Kent Smith, with whom he began to exchange remarks. At a few minutes past the appointed hour, Mrs. Trent entered, unannounced. She was a woman of about 28. She had a white, demure, saint-like face, smooth black hair, and lips so crimson and full that they seemed to be bursting with blood. Her tall, graceful body was most expensively attired. Kisses were exchanged between her and Mrs. Jameson. She bowed to the rest of the assembly and stole a half-glance and smile at Fall. The latter gave her a queer look, and Backhouse, who lost nothing, saw the concealed barbarian in the complacent gleam of his eye. She refused the refreshment that was offered her, and Fall proposed that, as everyone had now arrived, they should adjourn to the lounge hall. Mrs. Trent held up a slender arm. "Did you, or did you not, give me carte blanche, Montague?" "Of course I did," said Fall, laughing. "But what's the matter?" "Perhaps I have been rather presumptuous. I don't know. I have invited a couple of friends to join us." No one knows them. The two most extraordinary individuals you ever saw. And mediums, I'm sure." "It sounds very mysterious. Who are these conspirators?" "At least tell us their names, you provoking girl," put in Mrs. Jameson. "One rejoices in the name of Maskell, and the other in that of Nightspur. That's nearly all that I know about them, so don't overwhelm me with any more questions." "But where did you pick them up? You must have picked them up somewhere." "But this is a cross-examination. Have I sinned against convention? I swear I will tell you not another word about them. They will be here directly, and then I will deliver them to your tender mercy." "I don't know them," said Fall, "and nobody else seems to. But, of course, we will all be very pleased to have them. Shall we wait, or what?" "I said 9, and it's past that now. It's quite possible they may not turn up after all. Anyway, don't wait." "I would prefer to start at once," said Backhouse. The lounge, a lofty room 40 feet long by 20 wide, had been divided for the occasion into 2 equal parts by a heavy brocade curtain drawn across the middle. The far end was thus concealed. The near half had been converted into an auditorium by a crescent of armchairs. There was no other furniture. A large fire was burning halfway along the wall between the chairbacks and the door. The room was brilliantly lighted by electric bracket lamps. A sumptuous carpet covered the floor. Having settled his guests in their seats, Fall stepped up to the curtain and flung it aside. A replica, or nearly so, of the Drury Lane presentation of the temple scene in The Magic Flute was then exposed to view. The gloomy, massive architecture of the interior, the glowing sky above it in the background, and, silhouetted against the latter, the gigantic seated statue of the pharaoh. A fantastically carved wooden couch lay before the pedestal of the statue. Near the curtain, obliquely placed to the auditorium, was a plain oak armchair for the use of the medium. Many of those present felt privately that the setting was quite inappropriate to the occasion and savored rather unpleasantly of ostentation. Backhouse in particular seemed put out. The usual compliments, however, were showered on Mrs. Trent as the deviser of so remarkable a theatre. Fall invited his friends to step forward and examine the apartment as minutely as they might desire. Pryor and Lang were the only ones to accept. The former wandered about among the pasteboard scenery, whistling to himself and occasionally tapping a part of it with his knuckles. Lang, who was in his element, ignored the rest of his party and commenced a patient, systematic search on his own account for secret apparatus. Fall and Mrs. Trent stood in the corner of the temple, talking together in low tones, while Mrs. Jameson, pretending to hold Backhouse in conversation, watched them as only a deep-interested woman knows how to watch. Lang, to his own disgust, having failed to find anything of a suspicious nature, the medium now requested that his own clothing should be searched. All these precautions are quite needless and beside the matter in hand, as you will immediately see for yourselves. My reputation demands, however, that other people who are not present would not be able to say afterward that trickery has been resorted to. To Lang again fell the ungrateful task of investigating pockets and sleeves. Within a few minutes he expressed himself satisfied that nothing mechanical was in Backhouse's possession. The guests reseated themselves. Fall ordered 2 more chains to be brought for Mrs. Trent's friends, who, however, had not yet arrived. 2 more chairs.
Chairs.
I don't know what kind of chains they'd be bringing for them, but... He then pressed on an electric bell and took his own seat. The signal was for the hidden orchestra to begin playing. A murmur of surprise passed through the audience as, without previous warning, the beautiful and solemn strains of Mozart's temple music pulsated through the air. The expectation of everyone was raised, while beneath her pallor and composure, it could be seen that Mrs. Trent was deeply moved. It was evident that aesthetically she was by far the most important person present. Fall watched her, and with his face sunk on his chest, sprawling as usual. Backhouse stood up with one hand on the back of his chair and began speaking. The music instantly sank to pianissimo and remained so far as long as he was on his legs. Ladies and gentlemen, you are about to witness a materialization. That means you will see something appear in space that was not previously there. At first it will appear as a vaporous form, but finally it will be a solid body, which anyone present may feel and handle, and, for example, shake hands with. For this body will be in the human shape. It will be a real man or woman, which I can't say, but a man or woman without known antecedents. If, however, you demand from me an explanation of the origin of this materialized form, where it comes from, whence the atoms and molecules composing its tissue are derived, I am unable to satisfy you. I am about to produce the phenomenon. If anyone can explain it to me afterward, I shall be very grateful. That is all I have to say. He resumed his seat, half turning his back on the assembly, and paused for a moment before beginning his task. It was precisely at this minute that the manservant opened the door and announced in a subdued but distinct voice, "Mr. Maskell, Mr. Nightspore." Everyone turned around. Fall rose to welcome the late arrivals. Backhouse also stood up and stared hard at them. The 2 strangers remained standing by the door, which was closed quietly behind them. They seemed to be waiting for the mild sensation caused by their appearance to subside before advancing into the room. Maskell was a kind of giant, but of broader and more robust physique than most giants. He wore a full beard. His features were thick and heavy, coarsely modeled like those of a wooden carving, but his eyes, small and black, sparkled with the fires of intelligence and audacity. His hair was short, black and bristling. Nightspore was of middle height, but so tough-looking that he appeared to be trained out of all human frailties and susceptibilities. His hairless face seemed consumed by an intense spiritual hunger, and his eyes were wild and distant. Both men were dressed in tweeds. And those who don't know what tweed clothing looks like. It's a kind of period appropriate attire. If you ever watched any movies from like in around that era, you've definitely seen it. So, before any words were spoken, a loud and terrible crash of falling masonry caused the assembly party to start up from their chairs in consternation. It sounded as if the entire upper part of the building had collapsed. Fall sprang to the door and called to the servant to say what was happening. The man had to be questioned twice before he gathered what was required of him. He said he had heard nothing. In obedience to his master's order, he went upstairs. Nothing, however, was amiss there. Neither had the maids heard anything. Yeah. Classical paranormal event. I've never experienced this, but I have known people who have experienced exactly this. It's a very weird thing. Only specific people hear it, or only specific people in a certain area hear it. And outside of that, nobody else sees or hears or feels a thing. In the meantime, Backhouse, who almost alone of those assembled had preserved his sang-froid, suppose that's a fancy way of saying coolness, he kept it cool.
Yeah, his composure.
Went straight up to Nightspore, who stood gnawing his nails. Perhaps you can explain it, sir. It was supernatural, said Nightspore in a harsh, muffled voice, turning away from his questioner. I guessed so. It is a familiar phenomenon, but I have never heard it so loud. He then went among the guests, reassuring them. By degrees they settled down, but it was observable that their former easy and good-humored interest in the proceedings was now changed to strained watchfulness. Maskell and Nightspore took the places allotted to them. Mrs. Trent kept stealing uneasy glances at them. Throughout the entire incident, Mozart's hymn continued to be played. The orchestra also had heard nothing. Backhouse now entered on his task. It was one that began to be familiar to him, and he had no anxiety about the result. It was not possible to effect a materialization by mere concentration of will or the exercise of any faculty. Otherwise, many people could have done what he had engaged himself to do. His nature was phenomenal. The dividing wall between himself and the spiritual world was broken in many places. Through the gaps in his mind, the inhabitants of the invisible, when he summoned them, passed for a moment timidly and awfully into the solid-colored universe. He could not say how it was brought about. The experience was a rough one for the body, and many such struggles would lead to insanity and early death. That is why Backhouse was stern and abrupt in his manner. The coarse, clumsy suspicion of some of the witnesses, the frivolous aestheticism of others, were equally obnoxious to his grim, bursting heart, but he was obliged to live and to pay his way, must put up with these impertinences. Again, this is something that if you've looked into reports and stuff of this nature and people who do these kinds of things, this is a common report that this is one, very taxing on the body. It wastes you away rather quickly if you do it too much. And his explanation here, description of it, has not having to do with will, that it's not something that you can practice to do in a matter of like, yeah, I will will this to happen actively. Is also a common report on this. The only part that will plays is in the person being able to get, well, what's called generally the ego out of the way, or to sink the ego into a more primordial state, which is more in connection with the far broader world as it is, which, in this case includes the spiritual world in this story. He sat down facing the wooden couch. His eyes remained open but seemed to look inward. His cheeks paled and he became noticeably thinner. The spectators almost forgot to breathe. The more sensitive among them began to feel or imagine strange presences all around them. Maskell's eyes glittered with anticipation, and his brows went up and down, but Nightspore appeared bored. After a long 10 minutes, the pedestal of the statue was seen to become slightly blurred, as though an intervening mist were rising from the ground. This slowly developed into a visible cloud, coiling hither and thither and constantly changing shape. The professor half rose and held his glasses with one hand further forward on the bridge of his nose. By slow stages, the cloud acquired the dimensions and approximate outline of an adult human body, although all was still vague and blurred. It hovered lightly in the air, a foot or so above the couch. Backhouse looked haggard and ghastly. Mrs. Jameson quietly fainted in her chair, but she was unnoticed, and presently revived. The apparition now settled down upon the couch, and at the moment of doing so seemed suddenly to grow dark, solid, and manlike. Many of the guests were as pale as the medium himself, but Fall preserved his stoical apathy, and glanced once or twice at Mrs. Trent. She was staring straight at the couch and was twisting a little lace handkerchief through the different fingers of her hand. The music went on playing. The figure was by this time unmistakably that of a man lying down. The face focused itself into distinctness. The body was draped in a sort of shroud, but the features were those of a young man. One smooth hand fell over, nearly touching the floor, white and motionless. The weaker spirits of the company stared at the vision in sick horror. The rest were grave and perplexed. The seeming man was dead, but somehow it did not appear like a death succeeding life, but like a death preliminary to life. All felt that he might sit up at any moment. "Stop that music!" muttered Backhouse, tottering from his chair and facing the party. Fall touched the bell. A few more bars sounded, and then total silence ensued. "Anyone who wants to may approach the couch," said Backhouse with difficulty. Lang at once advanced and stared awestruck at the supernatural youth. "You are at liberty to touch," said the medium. But Lang did not venture to, nor did any of the others, who one by one stole up to the couch until it came to Fall's turn. He looked straight at Mrs. Trent, who seemed frightened and disgusted at the spectacle before her, and then not only touched the apparition, but suddenly grasped the drooping hand in his own and gave it a powerful squeeze. Mrs. Trent gave a low scream. The ghostly visitor opened his eyes, looked at Fall strangely, and sat up on the couch. A cryptic smile started playing over his mouth. Fall looked at his hand. A feeling of intense pleasure passed through his body. Maskell caught Mrs. Jameson in his arms. She was attacked by another spell of faintness. Mrs. Trent ran forward and led her out of the room. Neither of them returned. The phantom body now stood upright, looking about him, still with his peculiar smile. Pryor suddenly felt sick and went out. The other men more or less hung together for the sake of human society, but Nightspore paced up and down like a man weary and impatient, while Maskell attempted to interrogate the youth. The apparition watched him with a baffling expression, but did not answer. Backhouse was sitting apart, his face buried in his hands. It was at this moment that the door was burst open violently, and a stranger, unannounced, half leaped, half strode a few yards into the room, and then stopped. None of Fall's friends had ever seen him before. He was a thick, shortish man with surprising muscular development and a head far too large in proportion to his body. His beardless yellow face indicated, as a first impression, a mixture of sagacity, brutality, and humor. "Ahoy, gentlemen!" he called out loudly. His voice was piercing and oddly disagreeable to the ear. "So we have a little visitor here." Nightspore turned his back, but everyone else stared at the intruder in astonishment. He took another few steps forward, which brought him to the edge of the theater. "May I ask, sir, how I came to have... May I ask, sir, how I came to have the honor of being your host? Asked Fall suddenly. He thought that the evening was not proceeding as smoothly as he had anticipated. The newcomer looked at him for a second and then broke into a great roaring guffaw. He thumped Fall on the back playfully, but the play was rather rough, for the victim was sent staggering against the wall before he could recover his balance. "Good evening, my host." "And good evening to you too, my lad," he went on, addressing the supernatural youth, who was now beginning to wander about the room in apparent unconsciousness of his surroundings. "I have seen someone very like you before, I think." There was no response. The intruder thrust his head almost up to the phantom's face. "You have no right here, as you know." The shape looked back at him with a smile full of significance, which, however, no one could understand. "Be careful what you are doing," said Backhouse quickly. "What's the matter, Spirit Usher?" "I don't know who you are, but if you use physical violence toward that, as you seem inclined to do, the consequences may prove very unpleasant." "And without pleasure our evening would be spoiled, wouldn't it, my little mercenary friend?" Humor vanished from his face, like sunlight from a landscape, leaving it hard and rocky. Before anyone realized what he was doing, he encircled the soft white neck of the materialized shape with his hairy hands and, with a double turn, twisted it completely round. A faint, unearthly shriek sounded, and the body fell in a heap to the floor. Its face was uppermost. The guests were unutterably shocked to observe that its expression had changed from the mysterious but fascinating smile to a vulgar, sordid, bestial grin, which cast a cold shadow of moral nastiness into every heart. The transformation was accompanied by a sickening stench of the graveyard. The features faded rapidly away, the body lost its consistence, passing from the solid to the shadowy condition, and, before 2 minutes had elapsed, the spirit form had entirely disappeared. The short stranger turned and confronted the party with a long, loud laugh like nothing in nature. The professor talked excitedly to Kent Smith in low tones. Fall beckoned the Backhouse behind a wing of scenery and handed him his check without a word. The medium put it in his pocket, buttoned his coat, and walked out of the room. Lang followed him in order to get a drink. The stranger poked his face up into Maskell's. "Well, giant, what do you think of it all? Wouldn't you like to see the land where this sort of fruit grows wild?" "What sort of fruit?" "That specimen goblin." Maskell waved him away with his huge hand. "Who are you, and how did you come here?" "Call up your friend. Perhaps he may recognize me." Nightspore had moved a chair to the fire and was watching the embers with a set, fanatical expression. "Let Craig come to me if he wants me," he said in his strange voice. "You see, he does know me," uttered Cragg with a humorous look. Walking over to Nightspore, he put a hand on the back of his chair. "Still the same old gnawing hunger?" "What is doing these days?" demanded Nightspore disdainfully, without altering his attitude. "Surtur has gone, and we are to follow him." "How do you two come to know each other, and of whom are you speaking?" asked Maskell, looking from one to the other in perplexity. "Craig has something for us. Let us go outside," replied Nightspore. He got up and glanced over his shoulder. Maskell, following the direction of his eye, observed that the few remaining men were watching their little group attentively. End of chapter 1. Not much to comment on this so far. Well, it's setting up the story. See, there's not going to be much to comment on for the first, I think, 3 chapters. Because it only sets up like to where the story really begins. I mean, this is still part of the story, but the real thing doesn't get going until about chapter 4. Only thing to comment on, I didn't comment on like the names, but Maskell, the spelling is very telling. He's a giant, very sturdy. The way he described him, he's got a very intelligent way about him. He seems to be very interested in knowing things. This will come in very meaningfully later on, not too far down the line, actually. The spiritual themes, the difference between a spiritual world and the material world, and which is real, which is the dream, and which is reality, is going to come up a lot in the rest of the story. So, a mask skull, very fitting. He's supposed to be the avatar of the everyman of sorts, but a very special everyman, the everyman that's destined for something great. But also, mask skull also sounds like muscle, which I think is also on purpose because the guy's pretty big, very powerful in that sense. And that also comes in a lot in the story. Nightspore is probably one of the weirdest names in the whole book. It's kind of straightforward, but also like just really weird. It's not clear until the very end of the book why he's called Nightspore and what that really means. So I think I'll leave it until later on in the book to like really start talking about that. Crag, interesting guy. The way he was described, he's pretty ugly, and he's weird. He's displeasing, and he is so by his own character and design. And this is very purposeful. The name Crag. It becomes clear. This is not really a spoiler. Later on, there's a lot of music, and so there's a particular story of his name related to music, and so Crag as in like craggy melody, let's say. So that's the importance of that. The seance stuff, this is actually going to be referred to later on in the book, close to about the first third being over. This will be mentioned, and it will be far more meaningful then than it is now. Fall, I mentioned earlier, like it's clearly a name like that I think implies fallen in some form, and you can tell that Fall, unlike other people, seems to have no interest in these clearly amazing events.
Evokes foul.
It could also be that, and that would make sense as well. Like, so he's not. He's the everyman, which has is completely out of it, bored with existence, very superficial. Great things are happening before him, and he's none the wiser. Cannot tell the importance. Doesn't care. Let's see the other people in this. Other names. Let's see, Montague Fall. Fall. Scriabin, where he did that. Miss Jameson. I don't think there's really anything meaningful to that, except like this is a very common name. So it's like she's a very like common airhead person. So fitting.
Yeah, but she's aesthetically inclined. She's not just a common person. She's wealthy. She's
yeah.
She has patrician taste. She likes Scriabin. She likes Mozart. I mean, this is what, the 20s.
Yeah, this is the 20s.
So
yeah, like it is meaningful that this happens in a wealthy house. And it's also meaningful that we'll find out later. Well, Maskell and Night Spore themselves aren't wealthy. Uh, they're a couple of weirdos. We don't actually get much backstory in the rest of the book as to who these people are. There's some weird things that I've read, like other people, and I don't know where the hell they get this. Like, oh, Maskell's like World War I veteran or something. I don't know where they get it. Maybe I'll find out, like, paying more attention in this reading. But in all the times that I've listened to this, like, there's no backstory to Maskell at all. We don't really know, like, what he's gone through very much. All we know is he has a certain kind of character that will become very clear. Kent Smith, ex-magistrate, shrewd judicial humor, blah, blah, blah. Very old, still intelligent, though. Writing a story, in memoirs. He's well-connected, all these things. Doesn't seem to have much effect. This is a kind of typical thing. During this time, there was actually quite a flurry of this activity. Interestingly enough, you and I know quite a bit of this history and how a lot of this stuff actually came out due to Theosophy. And not only just due to Theosophy. Theosophy was one of the branch movements of what happened to spring up mysteriously out of nowhere in various places, also spearheaded by many, like the word fits, many like straight up occult groups. There's this secret groups deciding that this kind of show of sorts was something that they wanted to popularize and push forward for reasons. So around this time, you have William James attended a lot of seances. He was very interested in the paranormal stuff. Peirce also was very interested in that stuff. Who else famous was into that at the time?
Jung.
Well, Jung was, Freud was in his own way.
Yeah.
In this era, slight before this era, even you had people like Schelling, Hegel,
Mesmer.
interested in paranormal stuff.
People interested, yeah.
Yeah. Famous people, that most people would find respectable, but they're like, oh yeah, this occult stuff, it's nothing but garbage. No, very, very intelligent people were very interested in this stuff. Like William James, father of what is commonly called pragmatism, even though most people crowd themselves pragmatics, have nothing in connection to the intelligence or honesty and sincerity of William James. Because William James was not a science fuck yeah kind of guy. He treated science as it should be. He says, well, if there's a claim, go investigate it and really investigate it. Don't just go well, this doesn't fit into my preconceived worldview, therefore, it can't be real. So I think William James attended a lot of seances, and his final conclusion was he didn't know what to make of it, but he admitted he couldn't understand it, and some of it just kind of blew his mind, and he didn't know how to explain it. So let's see, Miss Trent. Don't think there's that much meaningful about her. Also an aesthete of the time, it seems.
Yeah, Trent means a traveler. It's just I don't know if it has any significance beyond.
Yeah, actually, yeah, okay, that fits her because she seems to be open-minded to things that other people aren't. She finds these two weirdos and just decides that they're the most interesting people to invite to her weird seance.
Yeah. Kind of person who, brings a +2. If you've attended parties, this type of person.
Let's see. Other people is, Pryor, the prosperous city coffee importer, and Lang, the stock jobber, well known in his own circles as an amateur prestidigitator.
Yeah, prestidigitator is a card a card handler. Yeah, person who does sleight of hand or whatever.
Oh, yes, that's why he was interested. He was the guy interested
Yeah,
in like checking all those things.
and a stock jobber is the same thing as a stockbroker. It's just an antiquated term for a stockbroker.
Prior, the Prosperous City coffee importer.
Prior, of course, means before.
Before,
So,
and coffee wakes people up first thing in the morning.
and it also means first, priority. My first thing, the first thing I'm going to do, my priority. So that ties into the coffee, perhaps, because it's most people's priority.
Yeah,
It's like, don't wake me before I have my coffee, or don't talk to me before I've had my coffee, type thing.
Let's see. Prior, perfuming the room with the faint odor of wine and tobacco smoke to try to introduce an atmosphere of joviality into the proceedings. Finding that no one seconded his efforts, however, he shortly subsided and fell to examine the watercolors on the walls. So it's very fitting. Like he tries to set up the mood of a gathering first.
Mm-hmm.
And
Lang, of course. Oh, sorry, you have more to say about it?
Yeah. In the rest of the book, like this is not very important, but in the rest of the book, I can tell you that given the concept of the main antagonist of this story, it will become obvious why someone like this, with this name and this attitude, would be here in this meeting. Oh. Would it be?
Yeah.
No, okay, yeah. I'll just keep off before I mention who the main antagonist is, because like it is part of the story to slowly figure out who is who, because there's a on purpose confusion as part of the experience of the story itself.
Yeah, so, I'll just say you should read this independently of us, but we will explore everything, hopefully.
Once things it becomes clear who is who, then we might remember this. But just know, like this can easily, if you remember it or if you do a reread it later on, you will understand why this guy is here. It's not, this kind of detail seems to be like, just like, it's like flavor text. It could or could not be there. I'm telling you right now, given the content of this story, the concept, I know why he put it there and why it has to be there. As a small detail as it is, nonetheless, this is constructed in that way. It's very purposeful. Let's see. Lang, tall, thin, and growing bald, said little but stared at Backhouse a good deal.
Yeah, Lang is literally long in German.
Yeah.
That's all I get out of it.
Yeah, it's okay. So the fitting name. Very, very literal. Everybody else takes coffee, but not Lang. Let's see. Professor of psychology.
Not Backhouse.
Yeah. So. Professor Halbart, professor of psychology, author and lecturer on crime, insanity, genius, and so forth. Considered their mental aspects. His presence mystified other guests, but all felt as if the object of the meeting had immediately acquired additional solemnity. He was small, meager-looking, and mild in manner, was probably the most stubborn-brained of all that mixed company. Completely ignoring the medium, he at once sat down beside Kent Smith, with whom he began to exchange remarks. Very fitting. Yeah. I don't know about the name. The name just seems...
Halbert. It's just another spelling of halberd, the spear with an axe attached at the end.
Okay, weapon. That's very fitting.
Yeah.
So it's what he studies, crime, insanity, genius, and he has no interest in the medium, which is like, everybody else, that's the interest.
He was just invited.
He's just like, it seems like he's just a typical skeptic. He's like, I'm just here to like see this bullshit. I already know it's all fake.
Yeah.
Goes and sits down with Kent Smith. Kent Smith was the retired judge, right? If I remember correctly.
Yep, the 70-year-old man.
Yep. So, very fitting.
Just two very common surnames, probably of a prominent family. You know, that's what they do sometimes, you know, when they're two prominent families. So we get like Carnegie Mellon, the Carnegie Mellon family, you know, the Kent Smith family. Combine.
Mm-hmm.
Legacy families, rather.
Yeah, so we already mentioned Mrs. Trent. She's very simple.
Yeah, this is the wife of Trent, who didn't make it, who wasn't coming.
Lounge. Let's see. I think the only thing important about like the structure of like the hall and all this stuff is, for what the occasion was, it was gaudy and it was just like off, like very like Egyptian themes, like, you know, the magic flute and stuff, like nothing to do with what was going on. So like, you know, just kind of one of those awkward things.
Yeah, there are these kind of rooms that were dedicated by the rich to just a bunch of different things. It stems from the time of the Holy Roman Empire, when emperors and so on, you know, like they would collect things in a room, and it would be called a wonder camera, like a wonder cabinet. It's just a bunch of different things crammed together. So it reminded me of that, where you got some things from the magic flute, you got some pharaohs that don't really fit together, but, you know, like it's all your antiques, you know, the things you own that you've collected that you put together.
Yeah. Let's see, like so let's see, presentation of the temple scene, the magic flute, the gloomy, massive architecture of the interior, the glowing sky above it, in the background, and silhouetted against the ladder, the gigantic seated statue of the pharaoh. Fantastically carved wooden. Yeah, it's just.
Yeah, just a bunch of stuff. I mean, it paints a picture. It's
yeah. Beyond that,
what is often called scenery porn, and you know, just to give you a full picture of what's happening where you are.
Let's see. Description of Maskell. Maskell was a kind of giant, but of broader and more robust physique than most giants. He wore a full beard. His features were thick and heavy, coarsely modeled, like those of a wooden carving, but his eyes, small and black, sparkled with the fires of intelligence and audacity. His hair was short, black, and bristling. Pretty straightforward. These things become clearer as like that robust physique, like a very detailed and determinate face, bristling hair, very short but bristling, full beard.
Yeah, full beard.
Mm-hmm.
So, meaning it's bushy, kind of.
Yeah.
Covering fully the, you know, bottom half of his face.
Let's see. Knightspor was of a middle height, but so tough looking that he appeared to be trained out of all human frailties and susceptibilities. Very weird description. I can only imagine this guy is kind of like what I well like it's kind of like a sailor physique where like sailors are to be a sailor you don't necessarily have to be like this big buff guy, but you can tell like somebody who sails like they are like they got a toughness about them that's like it's a very lean compact toughness. uh, you don't need a beefcake for that. His hairless face seemed consumed by an intense spiritual hunger, and his eyes were wild and distant. Both men were dressed in tweeds. So, I mean, I have a very peculiar image of that in my mind. I suppose it calls forth an image for everybody's mind. Let's see, other people.
Yeah,
Let's
I were
see.
talented to draw with the pencil. I would draw them, but
So would I. I have a very peculiar, very definite image I get in my mind about everything in this book. Let's see, Craig. Thick, shortish man with surprising muscular development and a head far too large in proportion to his body. His beardless yellow face indicated as first impression a mixture of sagacity, brutality, and humor. And then he has his voice was piercing and oddly disagreeable to the ear. And then whenever I read his stuff, I will spare anybody how like he probably like should sound, because don't want to make too much of an annoyance. But yeah, not much else to say about that. So yeah, we'll see for chapter 2. Excuse me. See you around.